Before British rule, India was home to the powerful Mughal Empire. Its royal family claimed descent from Genghis Khan to give them legitimacy. They also allowed their subjects to practice whatever religion they wanted, despite their individual kingdoms being part of the empire. The Mughals united individual Indian kingdoms to form the most wealthy empire in the world. This gave them access to some of the world's greatest militaries. Mughal rule even stretched into Afghanistan. Afghanistan is known as the deathbed of empires because it's so difficult to colonize, and that gives you an idea of how great the Mughals were. Comanche covered large areas of Texas and its surrounding states. Until 1860, it was occupied by the Comanche people, who took it from several other native groups. They maintained an economic system and were the dominant power in the region. They even went to war with Mexico, which they arguably won. Neighboring peoples deeply feared them, and they raided their enemies at will. We don't know how numerous they were, but their empire was unmatched in power, at least at one point. The Cadion Empire covered much of modern-day Iraq. Like Rome, it grew from a city-state and came to surpass the power held by its neighbors. It lasted for at least 200 years, but that's not what makes it noteworthy. Looking back, it was the first empire in recorded history, being founded over 2,000 years before the Roman Empire. The empire was established by Sargon of Akkad, who literally worked as a gardener before becoming king. After taking power, he began invading neighboring powers. His will to unite conquered lands into one single empire made him a true visionary, and his success in doing so was legendary. This was during the Bronze Age. Portugal isn't remembered as a global military power, but for 6 centuries, it held one of the most stable and wealthy empires. Its most valuable colony was Brazil, with its massive natural resources and access to trade routes. In fact, at one point, the Portuguese royal family even lived in Brazil. Portuguese explorers discovered more than most other nations, allowing the empire to colonize valuable lands without competition. The most impressive thing about the empire is how recently it fell. It was a colonial dictatorship until its overthrow by a peaceful revolution in 1974. Until that point, they held a lot of land in Africa, which they were winning a long war to retain. The Umayyad Caliphate was one of 4 major Islamic empires. It expanded rapidly, conquering all power rivals, giving them 4.3 million square miles to rule over, which included 29% of the human population. It was the superpower of its day, even controlling European lands. People tend to forget Spain and Portugal were Islamic countries for several centuries. During their rule, the Middle East underwent what you might call a proto-Renaissance. Culture and science flourished. The Caliphate fell in 750 as a result of civil wars and internal power struggles, but Spain would remain Islamic until the year 1492. Imperial Japan was an incredible military force. When World War II began, they had not lost a war for several lifetimes, and with each victory their military expanded. After a while, Japanese people didn't even believe defeat was a possibility, that their destiny was to conquer all Asia. They soon took Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Burma, the Philippines, and vast swathes of mainland China. So for a while it looked like their destiny was becoming a reality, but that was their downfall. Overconfidence meant they were unprepared to fight long wars. 2/3 of their military deaths came from illness or starvation. The British Empire was the biggest in history. Built on the annexation of specific trade routes, it was the first global superpower. British naval dominance maintained the empire until the end of World War I, as it guaranteed valuable colonies would be kept. Diplomacy and propaganda was also used, pitting its subjects against each other. It was an empire of illusion rather than steel. In 1913, the empire had 412 million subjects. That was 23% of the human population. 1997 is generally considered to be when the empire ended, when Hong Kong was handed back to China. And that's quite strange because it means almost everyone I know was born in the empire. After the Cadion Empire fell, it was succeeded by two great kingdoms. To the south was Babylonia, and to the north was Assyria. Where possible, the Assyrians would treat their enemies with endless brutality. People who submitted to them were also met with brutality, either being enslaved or exiled from their own land. But those who rebelled against them would have their eyes gouged out, with their children's execution being the last thing they saw beforehand. It was this kind of savagery that deterred rebellion, allowing Assyria to last almost 2,000 years. When it eventually did fall, Assyrian nobles were massacred as revenge for their tyranny. I hope none of you will be surprised to see the Mongols on this list. Their empire was the biggest continuous land empire in history. It was built on pure brute force and psychological warfare. Before conquering a city, they would send a messenger to demand surrender. No harm would come to those who did choose to surrender, but unbelievable brutality would meet those who did not. When Baghdad refused to surrender, the city was sacked and its population massacred. It was a city rich in knowledge, but the Mongols destroyed its libraries. The city ruler was wrapped up in a rug and beaten to death. This put fear into anyone else considering challenging the Mongols. In many ways, Rome was the first global power, controlling 20% of the human population at its peak. The empire stretched from Iraq to England and held full control of the Mediterranean Sea. The empire was so wealthy, entire species were hunted to extinction for Colosseum entertainment. They had elephants fighting rhinos and naval battle reenactments. At one point, 1/3 of Roman wealth was spent on Colosseum entertainment. They could only do this because they believed their destiny was to remain in power. Every modern European empire has sought to emulate Rome. That's how much prestige is still associated with the Roman Empire.
Law, language and literature, architecture and engineering. The pattern of our daily lives today has inherited much from the pattern of living in ancient Rome.
So that's the end of this video. If you want to support this channel, you can do so simply by leaving a like. And if you want more content from me, I have a second channel all about politics.